Ted Bundy continues to fascinate the entire world even decades after his rampage finally ended.
Bundy jumped out of this second-story window.
Ted Bundy was going to die.
Ted Bundy is not just another death row inmate.
We have convicted murderer Ted Bundy.
But we are still left asking questions. Welcome to Seeking Answers, and if you're into true crime, make sure you stick around because today we are looking at the case of Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November the 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont to mother Eleanor Louise Cowell, though she always went by her middle name of Louise while her son would forever be known as Ted. The identity of his biological father has forever remained a mystery. His birth certificate shows the name Lloyd Marshall, a salesman and Air Force veteran, though this parentage has never been confirmed. His mother Louise claims that she was seduced by an old money war veteran named Jack Worthington, so many actually list him as the official biological father, but it still remains unconfirmed. For the first 3 years of Ted's life, he lived in Philadelphia with his mother's parents Samuel and Eleanor Cowell. They were a religious family and knew that they would be shunned if people discovered that Louise had conceived a child outside of wedlock. Because of this, his grandparents maintained a facade that they were actually his parents and Louise was his older sister. And this illusion was kept up even with Ted himself before he discovered the truth in his teen years, though some speculate it was much later.
You, as I understand it, were raised in what you consider to have been a healthy home.
Absolutely.
You were not physically abused, you were not sexually abused, you were not emotionally abused.
No way. And that's part of the tragedy of this whole situation is because I grew up in a wonderful home with two dedicated and loving parents, one of 5 brothers and sisters. A home where we as children were the focus of my parents' lives, where we regularly attended church, 2 Christian parents who did not drink, they did not smoke, there was no gambling, there was no physical abuse or fighting in the home. I'm not saying this was Leave It to Beaver.
It wasn't a perfect home.
Well, no, I don't know that such a home exists, but it was a fine, solid Christian home, and nobody I hope no one will try to take the easy way out and to try to blame or otherwise accuse my family of contributing to this, because I know, and I'm trying to tell you as honestly as I know what happened.
Well, I went from a person who I really looked up to. I mean, Ted was my cousin. He was also a close friend and a buddy, and we hung out together. So it came as a terrible shock. I mean, we couldn't even believe it. Nobody believed it at first.
Despite his parental issues, Ted always spoke warmly of his grandparents and seemed close with his grandfather Samuel, almost idolizing him. However, in later years, it was discovered that his grandfather was a violent bully and a bigot who discriminated against black people, Italians, and Jews. He would often show violence towards his own wife and the family dog, and would even swing the neighbors' cats around by their tails. There was an incident where he threw Louise's younger sister Julia down a flight of stairs, all for simply oversleeping. He was seen speaking out loud to unseen presences and would fly into violent rages whenever Ted's paternity was ever brought up. During her pregnancy, anytime Louise even considered having an abortion, her father would enter an angry tirade, forbidding it entirely, forcing her to keep the child. Because of this behaviour, some family members believed that it was Samuel himself who impregnated his own daughter. Though in a 2020 documentary, some DNA was sampled using Ted's blood to confirm that he was not in fact a product of incest. By contrast, Ted's grandmother Eleanor was a timid and obedient woman, often suffering from depression, and she wouldn't even leave the house towards the end of her life. During his early years, Ted already began to show signs of extremely alarming behaviour. His Aunt Julia once woke up from a nap to find herself surrounded entirely by knives from the kitchen, while Ted, who was only 3 years old at the time, was standing by the bed smiling at her.
You know, that's the irony of everything. I mean, I never detected anything. My brother was really close to him because Ted was 5 years older than I am. And I was a little kid, and so I tended to play with the other little kids, and he hung out with Ted a lot. But he noticed that Ted really liked, even when they were fairly young, these really sort of lurid detective novels, which my brother thought was a little bit risque for his age group. But I mean, that was it. We never really saw anything that was out of the norm.
Ted, how did it happen? Take me back. What are the antecedents of the behavior that we've seen? So much grief, so much sorrow, so much pain for so many people. Where did it start? How did this moment come about?
That's the question of the hour, and one that not only people much more intelligent than I have been working on for years, but one that I've been working on for years and trying to understand it. Is there enough time to explain it all? I don't know. I think I understand it, though. Understand what happened to me, to the extent that I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
In 1950, Louise changed her surname to Nelson before she and her now 4-year-old son left Philadelphia to live with some cousins in Tacoma, Washington. A year later, she met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook, and they got married later that same year before he adopted Ted as his own, now officially making him Ted Bundy. The two would conceive 4 more children together, but Ted always remained distant, despite Johnny trying his best to keep him included. He always had some animosity towards him as he wasn't his real father, wasn't very bright, and didn't make much money.
I had moved back to the Seattle area to attend the University of Washington for my junior and senior year, so I got an apartment just a few blocks from Ted. I mean, we could literally walk to each other's place in about 6 or 7 minutes. So I saw him frequently. So we became really close. My friends really liked him. We all looked up to him. He was really a cool guy. He'd been doing these great things at the state capitol in politics, and he would regale us with these amazing stories about what he was doing, going undercover in the opponent's camp, working for the re-election of Dan Evans. So we thought he was a really cool guy. And then to find this out was so shocking.
Summer vacations from school, I'd go live with him for most of the summer vacation. He was living in Seattle, and he'd have me come up there, spend the weekend, a couple of times a month. You know, we'd go over and pick up Liz and Molly and get the raft out, and it would just be seem like a really healthy, okay, I got the basket, okay, doodle-doo, you know, here we go. Like the Wally and the Beaver, you know, that's an analogy some people won't understand, but we're very close.
His family and my family hailed from the Philadelphia area, and my parents moved out here in the late 40s. And then my father wrote to his mother, Louise, urging him to move out to the Seattle area so that she could start a new life. She was a single mom, and back then they called them unwed mothers, and she had this little 4-year-old boy that she really thought needed to start a new life, and so she took my dad up on that. And so we were the only family they had in the area. In fact, they lived with us for almost a year until she got a job and met the man she was going to marry and had 4 more kids. So we saw them frequently.
There's nothing in his background that can tell us what triggered all of this. In fact, up until Saturday, I didn't believe any of it.
During their time in Tacoma, the young Bundy roamed the neighborhood searching people's trash for pictures of naked women, and was an avid reader of detective magazines and crime novels. Ted was addicted to true crime documentaries, but was specifically interested in the sexual violence side of things, though he also took a liking to the images of dead or maimed bodies. He drank alcohol at a young age and searched the neighborhoods for undraped windows so he could spy on women undressing. Ted often chose to be alone, claiming he didn't understand relationships or friendships. He didn't know how to develop them or what made people friends to begin with. He didn't understand social interactions. Despite this, fellow classmates at Woodrow Wilson High spoke fondly of Ted, calling him well known and well liked during his time there. The only athletic activity that interested him was downhill skiing, which led to him stealing equipment and forging lift tickets. He was arrested at least twice during high school on suspicion of burglary and auto theft. However, by the time he hit the age of 18, this was all erased from his record, which was common practice in the state of Washington at the time.
I encountered outside the home again in the local grocery store, the local drugstore, the softcore pornography, what people call softcore. But as I think I explained to you last night, Dr. Dobson, in an anecdote, that as young boys do, we explored the back roads and sideways and byways of our neighborhood, and oftentimes people would dump the garbage and whatever they were cleaning out of their house, and from time to time we'd come across pornographic books of a harder nature than more graphic, you might say, more explicit nature than we would encounter, let's say, in your local grocery store. And this also included such things as, let's say, detective magazines and more hard.
Those that involve violence.
Yes, yes.
It was around this time when Ted was shown his birth certificate by his cousin, who acted cruel towards him, mocking him for his illegitimate birth and heavily bullying him. Ted always held a strong hatred and resentment for his mother for not telling him the truth about his parentage and for allowing him to find out all on his own. Ted Bundy graduated high school in 1965 before moving on to the University of Puget Sound for a year, but then he transferred to the University of Washington to study Chinese. On June the 23rd, 1966, in Seattle, Washington, 20-year-old flight attendants Lisa E. Wick and Lonnie Ree Trumbull were attacked and bludgeoned with a piece of lumber as they slept in their basement apartment near a store where Ted actually worked at the time when he was 19. Lisa Wick had permanent memory loss as a result, while Trumbull sadly passed away. Wick claims that she knows for a fact that it was Bundy who attacked them, and officers did admit that it held a lot of similarities to his later crime scenes, though there was no definitive evidence to link Ted to the attack.
This is something I think I want to emphasize, is the most damaging kinds of pornography. And again, I'm talking from personal experience, hard, real personal experience. The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
In 1967, Bundy actually started dating a girl from his class who was most commonly referred to as Stephanie Brooks, though her real name was Diane Edwards. In 1968, he dropped out of college and began working a bunch of minimum wage jobs before volunteering at the Seattle office of Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign, and Ted Bundy even became Arthur Fletcher's driver and bodyguard during his campaign for Lieutenant Governor of Washington State. Not long after, Diane Edwards ended her relationship with Bundy, claiming that she was frustrated at his immaturity and lack of ambition in life, with seemingly no future goals or prospects, and she returned to her family in California. Many point to this as one of the key elements that spurred on Ted's downward spiral into madness.
It's important to me, and that people believe what I'm saying, to tell you that I'm not blaming pornography, and not saying that it caused me to go out and do certain things. And I take full responsibility for whatever I've done and all the things that I've done. That's not the question here. The question and the issue is how this kind of literature contributed and helped mold and shape the kinds of violent behavior.
It fueled your fantasies.
Well, in the beginning it fuels this kind of thought process. Then, at a certain time, it's instrumental in what I would say crystallizing it, making into something which is almost like a separate entity inside. And at that point, you're at the verge, or I was at the verge of acting out on these kinds of thoughts.
Now, I really want to understand that. You had gone about as far as you could go in your own fantasy life with printed material, and you made or printed and video or film
magazines, yeah, what have you. Yeah.
And then there was the urge to take that little step or big step over to a physical event.
On May the 30th, 1969, 19-year-old college friends Susan Davis and Elizabeth Perry were on vacation when their car was found abandoned beside the Garden State Parkway just outside Somers Point, New Jersey. Their bodies were found 3 days later in the woods, one naked and one fully clothed. Bundy allegedly told a psychologist that his first ever victims were 2 women in the Philadelphia area. It was also believed that Ted had a car accident on the same weekend and was wearing a leg cast, which he may have used to gain their trust. However, there's no records of this car accident actually taking place, and this case officially remains unsolved. He took the breakup pretty hard and appeared to have been truly heartbroken. He travelled to Colorado and then visited relatives in Arkansas and Philadelphia before enrolling at Temple University. Once Bundy was back in Washington near the end of 1969, he met Elizabeth Klepfer, though she would later retell her story under the pseudonym Elizabeth Kendall, a single mother and divorcee from Ogden, Utah, who worked as a secretary on the university campus. She began a relationship with Ted which ended up being a lot more than she had bargained for. She described Ted as sweet, charming, and very confident. He often pampered Elizabeth and treated her like a princess. She called him a great father figure to her daughter, Molly, but Ted seemed like the perfect man for her and she very quickly fell in love with him.
Well, I was pretty smitten right from the get-go. I saw him sitting at the table and I went over and talked to him because I told him he looked lonely.
Is it fair to say, at least at first, that Ted Bundy was a gentleman?
Oh, completely. Put a lot of energy into making us happy, doing fun things. My parents loved him. He was just really it, in my opinion. And I really wanted to marry him.
Whatever transpired at the beginning of his interaction with my mother put her in a different category, and I think our placement in his life kept us safe. People knew he was involved with us.
By the time the 70s rolled around, Bundy seemed to know where his life was headed and returned to the University of Washington as a psychology major. He became well respected and appreciated by his professors and blossomed into a true honor student. In 1971, he took on a job at Seattle's Hotline Crisis Center where he met Anne Rule, who became a close friend and later his biographer. But Rule even admitted that there was nothing strange about this man whatsoever. He was kind, empathetic, and solicitous.
Well, I'm sure it works, and you've got to have faith it'll work, or else you'd be reduced to some kind of, mumbling idiot.
Normal, good-looking. My friends really liked him a lot. He would come by my apartment frequently. He was also always a welcome guest, and we would all gather around him because he would tell us these stories, and we were just kind of in awe of him. He was working for the Seattle Crime Commission. He was working on how to prevent crime against women. He wrote a pamphlet on prevention for women. We thought he was a really amazing guy. He was doing all these good works.
Does that mean ultimately you want to get involved in the criminal justice system?
Well, the funny thing happened to me on the way to labor law class one morning. I got 2 weeks in the spa, and yes, I intend to complete my legal education and become a lawyer and be a damn good lawyer. I think things are going to work out. That's about all I can say. Basically, I was a normal person. I wasn't some guy hanging out at bars or a bum, or I wasn't a pervert in the sense that, people look at somebody and say, I know there's something wrong with him, and just tell. I mean, I was essentially a normal person. I had good friends. I led a normal life, except for this one small but very potent and very destructive segment of it that I kept very secret and very close to myself and didn't let anybody know about it. And part of the shock and horror from my dear friends and family years ago when I was first arrested was that there was no clue. They looked at me and they looked at the all-American boy. And I wasn't perfect, but I want to be quite candid with you. I was okay.
On July the 19th, 1971, 24-year-old elementary school teacher Rita Patricia Curran was murdered in her basement in Burlington, Vermont after being strangled, bludgeoned, and her apartment was near where Ted was born, and the crime scene looked suspiciously similar to his later ones. However, there's no evidence to place Bundy in Burlington on that day. However, there are records of A. Bundy being bitten by a dog that week, but Ted's whereabouts during the summer of 1971 remain unaccounted for. On July the 22nd, 21-year-old Joyce LePage disappeared from the campus of Washington State University, and her skeletal remains were found 9 months later wrapped in carpeting and military blankets bound with a rope in a deep ravine. Bundy was later listed as a potential suspect, but was never confirmed.
Once you become addicted to it, and I look at this as a kind of addiction, like other kinds of addiction, I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like an addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something which gives you a greater sense of excitement, until you reach the point where the pornography only goes so far. You reach that jumping off point where you begin to wonder if maybe actually doing it will give you that which is beyond just reading about it or looking at it.
Ted graduated from the university in 1972 before joining Governor Daniel J. Evans for his re-election campaign.
It's hard for me to believe that what I did is newsworthy, and my part in the campaign was so insignificant. I'm embarrassed that I should be getting this publicity from it. Really embarrassed.
Due to his work there, Evans actually appointed Ted to the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee before he was hired as an assistant to the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party, Ross Davis. Davis really liked Bundy, describing him as smart, aggressive, and a believer in the system.
So Ted came over. That was a great evening because he showed up with a bag of groceries because we were always starving. So it was great because we fixed dinner, and afterwards we put on records and we were dancing around, and I had turned around to put on another record that was a little bit slower. And when I turned back, he was doing a slow dance with Margie, and she had her head leaned against his shoulder. And I looked at him and I didn't even recognize him, Piers. He had this really intense, mean look. His jaw was clenched. He looked angry. He was looking down at her, which really disturbed me. And his eyes, which were these beautiful blue eyes, had gone coal black. And I didn't even recognize him. I thought, who is this? And so I yelled out to him over the music. I said, hey, Ted, are you okay? Is something wrong? And finally, I stopped the record and yelled again, and then he snapped out of it at that point. And Margie looked up at him, wondering what was going on, and then the mask dropped, and he went right back to his normal self. And then I was just thought, well, that was weird, but you don't think that person's a serial killer at that moment. But the weird thing that happened right at that second was he said, I've got to go. And he just turned around and left right at that moment. I have no idea where he went after that.
During this time, Elizabeth fell pregnant with Ted's child. However, they both agreed that now wasn't the right time for them to become parents, as their lives were far too preoccupied. Elizabeth terminated the pregnancy, and according to her, Ted was incredibly sympathetic and caring during this entire ordeal. Despite some mediocre test scores, in early 1973, Ted was accepted into law school at the University of Utah, which was backed up with letters of recommendation from Evans, Davis, and many of his psychology professors. In the summer that year, despite still being romantically involved with Elizabeth, Ted reunited with his ex-girlfriend Diane Edwards, who was impressed with his transformation now as a serious, dedicated professional who had a future legal and political career ahead of him. Neither woman was aware of the other's existence, let alone relationship. On June the 19th, 1973, 17-year-old Rita Lorraine Jolly disappeared from West Lynn, Oregon, and on August the 10th, 24-year-old Vicki Lynn Holler vanished from Eugene. Ted admitted to 2 murders in Oregon, but never identified them, and there wasn't enough evidence to confirm if these women were the 2 or not. Bundy started the Utah Law School by the end of 1973 as things with Diane began to heat up. She would fly to Seattle several times to stay with him, and they even discussed marriage. Despite this intensity, in January of 1974, Ted randomly broke off all contact completely. He ignored all of her phone calls and letters for an entire month. When she finally managed to get a hold of him, she wanted to know why he decided to end things so abruptly without explanation. Ted, in a completely calm voice, stated that he had absolutely no idea what she was talking about before hanging up the phone, and she would never hear from him again. Bundy later claimed that he just wanted to prove that he could marry her if he wanted to, but Diane was convinced that he did this as nothing more than a revenge scheme for her breaking up with him so many years prior. At this point, Ted began skipping classes at law school, and by April he quit showing up altogether. It was around this time when Ted began committing his most confirmed and heinous crimes.
Do you remember the decision to go for it? Do you remember where you decided to throw caution to the wind?
Again, when you say pushed, I know what you're saying. I don't want to infer again.
I understand that.
That I was some helpless kind of a victim, and yet we're talking about an influence that is the influence of violent types of media and violent pornography, which was an indispensable link in the chain of behavior, the chain of events that led to the behaviors, to the assaults, to the murders, and what have you.
Just after midnight on January the 4th, 1974, Ted Bundy entered the basement apartment of 18-year-old Karen Sparks, who was a dancer and student at the university, and bludgeoned her with a metal rod from her own bed frame while she slept. He then proceeded to assault her with either that very same rod or a metal speculum, causing several internal injuries. Amazingly, Karen, who was unconscious for 10 days, did survive, though with permanent physical and mental disabilities that still remain to this day.
I was attacked and left for dead. He came into my home, took a bed frame off of my bed and smashed my skull. Then he used probably the same bed frame, smashed it into my vagina and into my bladder. My bladder was totally split. My roommate Bob thought I was still sleeping. Later on, he went down and checked me again, and there he found the blood, and it was just horrible for him to find me that way. And the next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital, and I thought, uh-oh, this is really bad. I've lost 50% of my hearing, 40% of my vision. I have terrible ringing and roaring in my ears is constant. I had epileptic fits. Luckily, I was able to overcome those.
In the early hours of February the 1st, Ted broke into the basement room of a 21-year-old university undergraduate named Linda Ann Healy, who broadcast morning radio weather reports for skiers. He proceeded to beat her unconscious, then dressed her in blue jeans, a white blouse and boots before carrying her away. Linda Ann Healy would be Bundy's first confirmed victim, and her remains would later be found at a nearby mountain site.
This was in, I believe, the very beginning of February. She disappeared. And we did not know for months what happened to her peers. We were absolutely devastated. We, for college students who didn't go out and get the paper, I got the paper every day. We were searching for any word of what happened to Linda. And then after her, that was just basically one a month started disappearing. 4 of them right within walking distance of where I lived.
It's a very difficult thing to describe. The sensation of reaching that point where I knew that it was like something had, say, snapped. That I knew that I couldn't control it anymore. That these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
On March the 12th, 19-year-old Donna Gail Manson, a student at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, left her dorm to attend a jazz concert, but never showed up. Her remains were never found, despite Bundy later confessing to disposing of them at the exact same mountain site. On April the 17th, 18-year-old Susan Elaine Rancourt vanished on her way back to her dorm after an evening advisors meeting at Central Washington State College in Ellensburg. Her remains were later discovered at the same mountain site. 2 witnesses later came forward claiming that they saw a man with his arm in a sling asking these women for help carrying some books to his brown or tan Volkswagen Bug. On May the 6th, 22-year-old Roberta Kathleen Parks left her dorm at Oregon State University in Corvallis to have some coffee with friends, but she never made it there, and her remains were also found at the same mountain site.
All these years later, it's very difficult to talk about it, and reliving it through talking about it is difficult to say the least, but I want you to understand what happened. It was like coming out of some kind of horrible trance or dream. I can only liken it to after, I don't want to over-dramatize it, but to have been possessed by something so awful and so alien, and then the next morning wake up from it, remember what happened, and realize that basically, in the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of God, you're responsible. To wake up in the morning and realize what I had done, and with a clear mind and all my essential moral and ethical feelings intact at that moment, absolutely horrified that I was capable of doing something like that.
On May the 27th, 1974, 14-year-old Brenda Joy Baker disappeared from Puyallup, Washington. Her body was discovered in Millersvania State Park the next month. Brenda Baker's murder still remains a mystery. The police were growing frustrated and extremely concerned. There was no physical evidence left behind as the bodies weren't found until months later, and the missing women seemed to have no connections. They were all young, attractive, white college females with long hair parted in the middle. That was all they had to go on. On June the 1st, 22-year-old Brenda Carol Ball vanished after leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien near the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. She was last seen talking to a man in the car park with brown hair and his arm in a sling. Her remains were found at the same mountain site a year later. In the early hours of June the 11th, 18-year-old University of Washington student Georgianne Hawkins vanished whilst walking down a brightly lit alleyway between her boyfriend's dorm and her sorority house. Ted managed to lure her to his car before using a crowbar to knock her unconscious. He then handcuffed her and drove her to Issaquah, where he strangled her to death. He then spent the entire night with her body and would later visit on 3 separate occasions. He even confessed to returning to the alleyway the next morning during the crime scene investigation, and he managed to find and remove Hawkins' earrings and one of her shoes to hide the evidence without being caught. Bundy's sheer attention to detail to remove any trace of him ever being there still baffles detectives to this day.
There is just absolutely no way to describe, first, the brutal urge to do that kind of thing, and then what happens is once it has been more or less satisfied and recedes, you might say, or spent, that sense, that kind of energy level recedes, and basically I became myself again.
One time that he came by, I had at that time moved into a house with some girlfriends, and the dog who had seen him before, this time he came to the door and the dog started going crazy. That dog's name was Jeffy. And he was a great dog, and it was great to have a dog that would alert us when people arrived. I looked out the window, saw Ted's VW Bug, which, by the way, I had ridden around in during that time. You know, the same car at the same time that women were being transported to their doom. And Jeffy was going nuts. And finally, my roommate and I opened the door. We had hold of Jeffy's collar, and he attacked Ted, went biting at his ankles and his feet, and I've never seen the dog like that. His hackles on end. He reared up. We could barely hold on to him. We finally physically had to haul him off into a little, like the bathroom or a back bedroom, and he just threw himself bodily against the door, howling and, trying to get our attention, and we ignored him. And so we were profusely apologizing to Ted. Oh God, we're so sorry. We don't know what got into him.
It just occurred to me that some people would say that, well, I've seen that stuff and it doesn't do anything to me. And I can understand that. Virtually everyone can be exposed to so-called pornography, and while they're aroused to it to one degree or another, not go out and do anything wrong.
Addictions are like that. They affect some people more than they affect others. But there is a percentage of people affected by hardcore pornography in a very violent way, and you're obviously one of them.
That was a major component, and I don't know why I was vulnerable to it. All I know is that it had an impact on me that was just so central to the development of the violent behavior that I engaged in.
Some witnesses came forward to claim that they saw a man that night in an alley behind the dorm on crutches with his leg in a cast, struggling to carry a briefcase. One woman claimed that he had asked her for help carrying the case to his car, which was a light brown Volkswagen Bug. Ted was notably charming and good looking, often using these traits as manipulation to gain the trust, sympathy and interest of the young women.
I think Ted Bundy is portrayed the way he is because people think of him as charismatic and good looking and all this stuff, and the media feeds off that. He never held a real job. He stole his clothes. He was a shoplifter for everything he got, even people's money and credit cards, which he would use. He had no worth to himself. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't, in my mind, good looking. He wasn't out there to help people or any of that. He was a loser. And yes, the victims are so totally not recognized. I think when they say this was a victim of Ted Bundy and she was going to school and she wanted to be a dancer, but they never do that. And there she goes, just a faceless victim.
On July the 1st, 1974, 19-year-old Sandra Jean Weaver vanished from Salt Lake City, Utah. Her naked body was found the next day near Grand Junction, Colorado. The murder remains a mystery, though there are conflicting reports about whether or not Ted mentioned her in his final interviews. During this time, he was working in Olympia as the assistant director of the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Commission and would later go on to the Department of Emergency Services. And this very agency were actively involved in the missing person cases.
He came over. Now I had moved out of my apartment and moved into a house. And my brother shows up with Ted in tow, and he has this barrel lock because he didn't feel like our door was safe enough. So he goes and he's putting the lock on the door, and Ted is in the house, giving him, just little tips and teasing him about it. And I'm relieved because I'm glad there's another line of defense. And here, all the while, the monster is in my house. And Piers, all he would have had to have done was knock on the door and I would have let him in.
It was here where he met and began to date Carol Ann Boone, again behind the back of Elizabeth Klepfer. Over the years, Elizabeth did find Ted being unfaithful with other women, but always took him back out of love and trust. Bundy manipulated her and promised to change, but continued the same pattern, often growing angry and yelling at her in violent outbursts. The reports of the attacks and disappearances all became public, and fear began to spread, with pressure being added to the police force, but the lack of physical evidence continued to make things difficult. They also noticed that all of the disappearances took place at night near construction work within a week of midterms or final exams, and all of the victims were wearing slacks or blue jeans. Furthermore, the sightings of a man in a sling or cast with a brown or tan Volkswagen Bug were becoming a lot more frequent. But this would change on July the 14th, when 2 abductions took place in broad daylight on a crowded beach at Lake Sammamish State Park in Issaquah, Washington. 5 witnesses described a young, attractive man in a white tennis outfit, his left arm in a sling with a light accent, possibly Canadian or British, introducing himself as Ted and asking for their help in unloading a sailboat from his tan or bronze-coloured Volkswagen Bug. So, he changed his accent, but he kept using his real name. I don't think he was as smart as people give him credit for. 4 of them refused, but 1 agreed. However, once she reached his car and saw that he had no sailboat, she quickly fled the scene to safety. He then approached 23-year-old probation case officer Janice Ott, and she was seen leaving the beach with him. Just 4 hours later, 19-year-old computer programming student Denise Nasland left a picnic to go to the toilet and never returned. Bundy would later claim that Janice Ott was still alive by the time he brought Denise Nasland to her. He forced one to watch him murder the other, though this is a claim that he would later retract and deny actually happening. With this many witnesses, however, the police now had a detailed description of Ted and posted flyers all throughout Seattle. A University of Washington psychology professor, Anne Rule, his own girlfriend Elizabeth Klepfer, and even an employee of his all recognized him from the sketch and believed, based on the witnesses, that Ted Bundy was possibly responsible. Elizabeth had had slight suspicions beforehand, but the first sketch that was presented she felt looked nothing like him. The second drew a striking resemblance, though not entirely, as the hair didn't match. She confided her concerns to a friend, but the possibility of Ted murdering these people and then using his real name seemed silly to him. Well, you'd be surprised.
There was just something about the jawline or something like that that made me think, wow, this is really weird.
Did you think he was capable of murder?
No.
I mean, I still believed he was innocent at that point.
So Ted pulls up to our house. My boyfriend at the time, Don, was there, who's now my husband. He pulls up and, we look out front and see the tan V-dub, and he comes in and we have the newspaper right there, and Don can't wait to show him the front page. There's a composite drawing of this guy that had attacked these women out at a lake not far from Seattle. And they also had overheard that his name was Ted, as you pointed out. And so we thrust it into his face and said, "Hey, Ted, this looks just like you." We were joking because we felt sorry for him that this was going on.
How did he react?
And he did. He just laughed. He goes, "Oh, I know." I mean, he says, "I'm doing everything I can to help." He said, "The police are just doing their job." And in fact, he said, there are about 40,000 VW bugs in the state of Washington, which was about right at that time. There were a lot. They were everywhere. And about 400 people with the name of Ted that own VW bugs. I found out later it was more like 100, so he exaggerated a bit. But he seemed perfectly calm. He could lie so easily. He had no trouble making it sound like that he was just helping out.
The basic humanity and basic spirit that God gave me was intact, but it unfortunately became overwhelmed at times. And I think people need to recognize that it's not some kind of those of us who have been so much influenced by violence in the media, in particular pornographic violence, are not some kinds of inherent monsters. We are your sons and we are your husbands. And we grew up in regular families, and pornography can reach out and snatch a kid out of any house today. It snatched me out of my home 20, 30 years ago. And as diligent as my parents were, and they were diligent in protecting their children, and as good a Christian home as we had, and we had a wonderful Christian home, there is no protection against the kinds of influences that are loose in a society that tolerates.
You feel this really deeply, don't you?
Regardless, they suggested she at least inform the police to ease her mind, especially considering the fact that Bundy had told her that he was visiting Lake Sammamish the same day of the disappearances, which she found odd as neither of them had ever been there before. However, detectives were receiving around 200 names a day. A clean-cut, handsome law student with no criminal record seemed unlikely to be guilty of these crimes, and they soon discarded him as a suspect. In August of 1974, Ted received a second acceptance from the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City, leaving his girlfriend Elizabeth in Seattle, Washington. They would still talk on the phone quite frequently, but Ted continued to date dozens of other women behind her back. Unfortunately, during his time at the university, he was saddened to realize that the other students were far more intelligent than he was, which really disheartened him as he began to struggle with the work. On September the 2nd of the same year, Ted was killed and strangled an unidentified hitchhiker in Idaho, and then either disposed of the remains in a nearby river or returned the next day to photograph and dismember the corpse. It's unclear which, as her remains were never found and her identity remains a mystery to this day. On September the 6th, 2 hunters found the skeletal remains of Janice Ott and Denise Nasland near a service road, 2 miles from where they were taken. Other body parts were also discovered, which Ted would later identify as being Georgianne Hawkins. It wasn't until 6 months after this, even more remains were discovered and later identified as many of the missing girls. Now the missing girls, who had all vanished from different locations, had somehow wound up buried together in the same place. Suddenly, the police realised that all of these cases were connected, and they were looking for a serial killer.
I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
That's true.
And it's real. It's true.
On October the 2nd, he attacked and murdered 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in a small suburb of Salt Lake City. He claimed to have buried her remains near Capitol Reef National Park, but they were also never recovered. On October the 11th, young pharmacy student Rhonda Stapley was waiting for a bus outside the University of Utah, but it was running late. Bundy slowly drove past and pulled up, offering her a lift, which she accepted. Rhonda did notice that the passenger side had no door handle to get out, but as a fellow student, she didn't find this out of the ordinary. Ted seemed charming and genuine, as always introducing himself with his real name, and they bonded over both being students. However, he drove straight past the university campus and asked if it was okay for him to run a quick errand first. Again, not finding this strange, Rhonda agreed until he continued driving and went straight past the turn that he told her he was going to take. They went up to Big Cottonwood Canyon and he began to look for a place to park. Rhonda assumed he was looking for a place to simply stop and make out, and although she was uncomfortable and uninterested, she didn't believe that she was actually in any immediate danger. Until the car stopped. Ted whispered, "I'm going to kill you," before he violently strangled her to unconsciousness and then raped her. Rhonda tried to fight him off, and at some point during the struggle, Bundy made the mistake of turning his back on her for just a second. Rhonda used this opportunity to make a run for it, landing in a lake which carried her away to safety, and thankfully, she escaped with her life. Rhonda then had to hike 10 miles back home and didn't tell anyone of this horrific ordeal for almost 40 years. Like many assault victims, Rhonda blamed herself for getting into the car of a complete stranger and was scared that nobody would believe her or they would judge her for her actions. Over the years, she suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, having frequent nightmares, reliving the ordeal before finally speaking out in 2011.
It's made out that Bundy lured them all in and they went with him willingly and he attacked them because of that. And it's not true. There were only a couple that went to help him because he had a cast in his arm or he acted like he was ill. And only a few of those women went with him and they were killed and they were mutilated and they had no right to be treated like that. And he just did what he did because he wanted to. He wanted to kill them. He wanted to feel the need to control them.
Are you thinking about all those victims out there and their families? Well, who are so wounded, years later, their lives have not returned to normal. They will never return to normal.
Absolutely.
Are you carrying that load, that weight? Is the remorse there?
Again, I know that people will accuse me of being self-serving, but we're beyond that now. I mean, I'm just telling you how I feel. But through God's help, I have been able to come to the point where much too late, but better late than never, feel the hurt and the pain that I am responsible for. Yes, absolutely. In the past few days, myself and a number of investigators have been talking about unsolved cases, murders that I was involved in. And it's hard to talk about all these years later because it revives in me all those terrible feelings and those thoughts that I have
On October the 18th, 1974, Melissa Ann Smith, the 17-year-old daughter of the police chief, vanished after leaving a pizza parlor. Her naked body was found 9 days later in a nearby mountainous area. It's believed that she may have remained alive for up to 7 days after disappearing. She was beaten, sodomized, and strangled with nylon stockings. On October the 31st, 17-year-old Laura Ann Amy vanished just after midnight after leaving a cafe 25 miles south of Lehi, Utah. Her body was found naked on Thanksgiving 9 miles northeast of American Fork Canyon. Her face was beaten so badly that when her father was brought in to identify her body, he could only do so based on the scars on her arms from where a horse had thrown her into a barbed wire fence when she was 11. Both Laura and Melissa were subject to bizarre post-mortem rituals which included Bundy shampooing their hair and applying makeup to their faces.
Each time I'd harm someone, each time I'd kill someone, there'd be an enormous amount, especially at first, enormous amount of horror, guilt, remorse afterwards. But then that impulse to do it again would come back even stronger. Now, believe me, the unique thing about how this worked, Dr. Dobson, is that I still felt in my regular life the full range of guilt and remorse about other things.
On November the 8th, Ted approached 18-year-old telephone operator Carol DeRonch at Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. He identified himself as Officer Roseland and claimed that someone had tried to break into her car, even providing a badge to prove that he was with the police force. Despite her car seeming fine, he insisted on her accompanying him to the police station to file a report. Not long into the drive, Carol realised that they were not going in the direction of the police station, and she quickly brought it to Ted's attention, who immediately pulled the car over and attempted to handcuff her. However, during the hectic struggle, Bundy accidentally fastened both handcuffs to the same wrist, allowing DeRonch to escape and flee to safety. Later that same evening, 17-year-old student Deborah Jean Kent disappeared, 20 miles north of where Carol DeRonch was attacked. She left a theatre production at the Viewmont High School in Bountiful, Utah to pick up her brother. The school's drama teacher later claimed that a stranger had asked both her and Deborah Kent to come out to the car park to identify a vehicle. Another student claimed that the same man was even pacing in the rear auditorium, and he was seen again shortly before the play ended, though her remains wouldn't be identified for another 41 years. During the search for evidence outside the auditorium, a key was discovered, and unfortunately for Ted, it fit the handcuffs on Carol DeRonch, now connecting him to both crimes. In November that year, Elizabeth Klepfer noticed that the disappearances had now followed Ted to Salt Lake City, Utah as well. She had previously noticed some crutches in his apartment which many witnesses claim was used to entice the victims to go with him, convincing her further that he was involved. She decided to call the police once again. Elizabeth still loved and wanted to trust this man deeply, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was responsible, though she hoped that she was wrong. He was now rising as the #1 suspect. However, witnesses from the Lake Sammamish disappearances who saw this man more than anyone failed to identify Bundy from a photo lineup. He had a habit of shaving his head or beard or growing it out to change his appearance to deter witness accounts. But at the request of Elizabeth, the police did add him back to the list of suspects, though no evidence could link him to the crimes in Utah. She called them up 2 more times, but her concerns were dismissed, often being told that they would look into him, but they never would. There was even a previous encounter where Ted had attacked Elizabeth during a trip to a lake, but since she was still trying to trust the man that she loved, she didn't disclose this to the police, though she did write about it in her later book.
We had been rafting down a very cold river. I was sitting on the edge of the raft and he pushed me in, just quite violently. I grabbed a hold of the rope that was dragging behind the raft so that I could get back in, but his eyes were they just got really weird looking, and it was like he couldn't see me anymore.
You saw his eyes change.
Absolutely.
Quote, "I was sitting on the edge of the raft, paying attention to nothing in particular, when suddenly and without warning Ted lunged at me, put his hands on my shoulders and pushed me into the river. The plunge into the icy water took my breath away. I came up sputtering and grabbed the rope on the edge of the raft, too dazed for the moment to do more than hang on. I looked up at Ted and our eyes locked. His face had gone blank as though he was not there at all. I had a sense that he wasn't seeing me. I struggled to pull myself into the raft. He didn't move, he didn't speak. I could find no expression on his face. Why do you have to ruin everything?" I began when I could finally talk. "That's not funny at all." He still looked at me as if I were a stranger. Then he looked away and said, "It was no big deal. Can't you take a joke?" End quote.
What I'm talking about is going beyond retribution, which is what people want with me. Going beyond retribution and punishment, because there is no way in the world that killing me is going to restore those beautiful children to their parents and correct and soothe the pain. But I'll tell you, there are lots of other kids playing in streets around this country today who are going to be dead tomorrow and the next day and the next day and next month because other young people are reading the kinds of things and seeing the kinds of things that are available in the media today.
In January of 1975, Ted Bundy returned to Seattle, Washington after his final exams and spent a week with Klepfer, having absolutely no idea that she had reported him to the police on more than one occasion, though she did plan to visit him in Salt Lake City in the summer. On January the 12th, 23-year-old registered nurse Karen Eileen Campbell vanished whilst walking down a well-lit hallway between an elevator and her room at the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village, Colorado. Her naked body was discovered a month later next to a dirt road just outside the resort. She was killed by numerous blows to the head from a blunt instrument which left many indentations on her skull, and her body included many deep cuts from a sharp weapon. On March the 15th, 26-year-old ski instructor Julie Cunningham was walking from her apartment to a dinner date with a friend, 100 miles northeast of Snowmass, when Bundy approached her on crutches and asked her to help carry his ski boots to his car. He then clubbed and handcuffed her before assaulting and strangling her at a different location, near Rifle, 90 miles west. Weeks later, Bundy drove 6 hours to the location just to revisit her remains.
I can't begin to understand the pain that the parents of these children that I have and these young women that I have harmed feel. And I can't restore really much to them, if anything. I won't pretend to, and I don't even expect them to forgive me, and I'm not asking for it. That kind of forgiveness is of God, and if they have it, they have it. If they don't, well, maybe they'll find it someday.
Do you deserve the punishment the state has inflicted upon you?
That's a very good question. And I'll answer very honestly. I don't want to die. I'm not going to kid you. I'll kid you not.
On April the 6th, 1975, 25-year-old Denise Lynn Oliverson vanished near the Utah-Colorado border whilst riding her bicycle to her parents' house. Her bike and sandals were discovered under a viaduct near a railroad bridge. Bundy claimed that he threw her remains into the Colorado River, but they were never found. On April the 15th, 1975, 18-year-old Melanie Suzanne Cooley disappeared in Nederland, Colorado. Her body was discovered 2 weeks later bludgeoned and strangled in Coal Creek Canyon. After checking gas station receipts, it was confirmed that Bundy was near the location the day that she went missing, and many believe that he was responsible, though there's not enough evidence to confirm it. On May the 6th, Ted lured 12-year-old Lynette Dawn Culver from Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello, Idaho, 160 miles north of Salt Lake City, back to his hotel room, where he drowned and assaulted her before disposing of her body in a river. Police believed it to have been Snake River, though again, she was never found. During May, 3 of Bundy's colleagues, including the aforementioned Carol Ann Boone, visited him in Salt Lake City and stayed in his apartment for a week, but none noticed any strange behaviour. A month later, Ted spent a week in Seattle with Elizabeth, where the two began to discuss wedding plans, hopefully for the following Christmas. On June the 28th, Susan Curtis vanished from the campus of Brigham Young University, 45 miles south of Salt Lake City. Her remains were never found. On July the 1st, 1975, 24-year-old Shelley K. Robertson went missing from Golden, Colorado. Her naked and decomposing body was discovered the next month, 500 feet inside a mine near Winter Park Resort. Gas station receipts again do put Ted Bundy in the area at the time, but nothing definitive was ever found. On July the 4th, 1975, 23-year-old Nancy Perry Bard vanished from Layton, Utah and was never discovered. But Ted always maintained that he had absolutely nothing to do with her disappearance. In August or September of 1975, it's unclear which, Ted was baptized in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, despite not being an active participant in the services, and the fact that he ignored most of the church's restrictions. Ted was raised in a religious household, though he himself would not convert to those beliefs until later on in life.
You have accepted the forgiveness of Jesus Christ and are a follower and a believer in Him. Do you draw strength from that as you approach these final hours?
I do. I can't say that
it's going to be
being in the valley of the shadow of death is something that I've become all that accustomed to, and that I'm strong and nothing's bothering me. Listen, it's no fun. It gets kind of lonely, and yet I have to remind myself that every one of us will go through this someday, in one way or another, and countless millions who have walked this earth before us have. So this is just an experience which we all share, and here I am.
The police were still no closer to finding evidence or a culprit for the disappearances. They started compiling a database with all of the information they had. Friends or classmates of each victim, men named Ted who owned Volkswagens, known sex offenders and more. Out of thousands of names, 26 of them turned up on 4 separate lists. And one was Ted Bundy. On August the 16th, 1975, Utah officer Bob Haywood spotted Ted driving in a residential area in the early hours of the morning. And as soon as Bundy saw the patrol car, he took off at high speed. Haywood gave chase and managed to arrest Bundy. Upon searching the vehicle, the officer noticed that the front passenger seat was taken out and placed on the back. He also found a ski mask, a second mask that was fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items usually used for burglaries. Ted, however, denied this, claiming that the mask was simply for skiing. He said he found the handcuffs in a dumpster and the rest were just normal household items. He also claimed that he only sped off because he was smoking marijuana and needed time to get rid of the evidence. However, Detective Jerry Thompson remembered a very similar description of Ted and his vehicle during the kidnapping of Carol DeRonch the previous November. In addition to Elizabeth's many phone calls, they searched Ted's apartment and found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with the Wildwood Inn specifically checkmarked, as well as a brochure for the Viewmont High School where Deborah Kent had gone missing. However, amazingly, this wasn't enough evidence, and he was let go. Once home, Ted destroyed a collection of Polaroid photographs that he had taken of his victims that the officers had completely missed during their search.
You'll have to admit there's a hell of a lot of circumstantial evidence, at least circumstantial. It seems to somebody who has simply read newspapers and articles.
No, I won't admit that. No, I don't call it's not circumstantial as far as I'm concerned. I don't really know exactly what you're referring to, and I don't really want to discuss it. But I don't care what anybody says or the suspicions anyone harbors on the basis of that misinformation. And indeed, that's what I call it. Circumstantial information, perhaps, but misinformation as far as I'm concerned. A lot of people trying to pin a lot of stuff on somebody because, it's convenient.
Salt Lake City police now put him under 24-hour surveillance, and Elizabeth Klepfer was questioned. She admitted that during the year before Ted moved to Utah, she would discover objects around her house or Ted's apartment that she just couldn't understand. Like crutches, a bag of plaster of Paris which he admitted he stole from a medical supply house and she believed he used to fake his injuries to gain the women's trust, surgical gloves, an oriental knife in a wooden case that he kept in his glove compartment, a wrench taped halfway up the handle which he kept in the back of his car, a sack full of women's clothing, and a meat cleaver that he never used for cooking. He was also in great debt at the time, and Elizabeth believed that almost everything he owned was stolen. She did confront him at one point about his new TV and stereo, and Ted warned her that if she told anyone, he would break her neck. Their relationship would often be tested. Bundy would promise to stop stealing but then go right back to it immediately after. He would also very often grow angry or upset if Elizabeth ever considered cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle, much like many of his victims. She would also awaken in the middle of the night sometimes to find Ted under the covers with a flashlight, examining her body. Detectives were able to confirm that Ted had not been with Elizabeth at any point during any of the abductions. It was during this time that she discovered the truth about Bundy's other relationships, specifically his previous engagement to Diane Edwards, but much like before, they remained together. In September, Ted actually sold his Volkswagen as a way to get rid of the evidence, but the Utah police quickly impounded it, and the FBI dismantled and searched the vehicle for clues. And they found hair matching samples found on Karen Campbell's body. They also found hair strands of Melissa Smith and Carol DeRonch, though others say that these were more inconclusive than the previous ones. They now had evidence to link Ted to the disappearances. 3 different victims who had all never met somehow happened to be in his car at some point in time by coincidence, which is incredibly unlikely. Though Bundy continued to profess his innocence, claiming that the police wanted him to be guilty and therefore planted the evidence on him.
I know that there's a lot of police ego on the line. I know that a lot of men in the Detectives Division in Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office jobs are on the line. I know that it's a long time ago it ceased to be an issue as to whether or not I was innocent or guilty. The issue is now is, can we pin it on him? Can we follow through and maintain our reputation as law enforcement officers? And I'll tell you, as long as they attempt to keep their heads in the sand about me, there's going to be people turning up in canyons, and there are going to be people being shot in Salt Lake City because the police there aren't willing to accept what I think they know, and they know that I didn't do these things.
I didn't want to believe that my dear cousin could be responsible for these horrific crimes against women that looked just like me, and, you know, of a mutual acquaintance. It was beyond belief. I didn't want to believe it at first. And back then, news didn't travel as quickly between different jurisdictions. The information was trickling in, and so we were just starting to learn about these things.
What happens if you're in prison 5 years and nothing like what has happened in the past happens again?
What do you mean?
I mean, any of the things that you have been accused of by innuendo, by rumor, by the police departments or whatever. What if there are no killings, there are no kidnappings?
It's already happened, hasn't it? I've heard some reports. I number the incidents between 5 and 8, which are similar to the ones which the police have had the nerve to try to associate with me. It's going to continue to happen in Salt Lake and Utah until those police start to wise up and stop counting their chickens before they hatch. I think it's a terribly dangerous mentality to try to pin something on somebody who they believe there's a possibility it couldn't have done it. And as long as they believe that, they're not going to find the right man. And the man who kidnapped Carol DeRonch is going to continue to be free. And not only her, but every other young woman in the Salt Lake Valley is going to be threatened by that person or persons. And it's happening today, and it's going to happen in the future.
Despite again trying to disguise his appearance, on October the 2nd, Bundy was put into a lineup, and Carol DeRonch immediately identified him. Witnesses that same day also pointed him out as the man they had seen lingering around the high school auditorium moments before Deborah Kent went missing. Despite this, there wasn't enough evidence to link him to the latter, as her body wasn't discovered until later. However, there was enough to charge him for the kidnapping and assault of Carol DeRonch. Ted again claimed that the police were setting him up. Before being charged, Carol was shown a photo lineup and she failed to correctly identify him as her abductor. Bundy claimed that the officers showed her the real photo beforehand in order for her to correctly identify him in the face-to-face lineup.
When Carol DeRonch, the kidnapping victim from Utah, came to testify in this preliminary hearing here, I was beside myself with rage. She is turning into a professional witness as far as I'm concerned. She is a prosecution witness. And when I heard her go through that routine that I had heard 3 times before, I had restrained myself every time. I couldn't do it this time. And I told my attorney, I said, I'm going to get up. And I got up and I pointed at the judge and I pointed at her and I said, she's lying. She's lied 3 times before and she's lying now. And I felt it. And he pulled me down and he says, listen, he says, you can't do that. And I said, okay, but I had to do it for once.
He was bailed out by his parents for $15,000 as they also maintained his innocence. Ted spent most of his time during this saga in Seattle, Washington, living with Elizabeth Klepfer. They didn't have nearly enough evidence to link him to the murders in Washington, but they did keep him under surveillance. Elizabeth claims that they couldn't even go out to their porch without police cars starting up their engines, ready to pursue them if needed.
I noticed a bunch of people running down to the corner because I was finishing up at the bookstore, and I got a terrible feeling in my stomach that something was going on, and so I went down there, and as the crowds parted, in the center of the crowd was my cousin, Ted Bundy, doing just as you described, standing there with his arms outstretched, turning like he was a messiah, actually acting proud that he was Ted Bundy, and that's the moment that I realized that he wasn't who I thought he was at all.
I'm perfectly happy with the person I am, and I've always been. There's I don't pay my telephone bills on time, and I don't write my mother as many letters as I should. There are all kinds of things I can improve about myself, but a weirdo knows I feel good about myself. I'm happy with myself.
You know, the total transformation that happened to me in a matter of seconds, where I had gone from hoping and praying that it was mistaken identity to complete conviction. Nobody else had had that kind of experience, so it's understandable why everybody came to the decision at their own pace. And I did tell that story to my parents, and they slowly had to believe me.
In February of 1976, 17-year-old Debbie Smith vanished from Salt Lake City, Utah. Her body was found 2 months later near the Salt Lake City International Airport. Many list her as one of Bundy's victims, though there's never been any official confirmation. Detectives had convinced themselves that Ted Bundy was indeed the killer, but they knew they needed more evidence before they could charge him with anything. Well, Bundy claimed that they were wasting their time on him instead of looking for the real murderer. A popular rumor was that Ted Bundy actually underwent a polygraph test to prove that he was innocent, and it came back that he was telling the truth, while others say that it was inconclusive. However, there are no credible sources to confirm that Ted even took a polygraph test to begin with. But even if he did, it's believed that he knew enough about law and was intelligent enough to be able to beat the test anyway, as many confirmed serial killers have done before. He had a lot less anxiety and a lot more confidence than those usually asked to adhere to these kind of examinations. In February of 1976, Bundy stood trial for the kidnapping of Carol DeRonch. He was advised to waive his right to a jury due to the negative publicity surrounding the case, but after a 4-day bench trial and a weekend of deliberation, Ted was still found guilty of kidnapping and assault despite still maintaining his innocence. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison.
Needless to say, I think the jury is totally wrong. They didn't take enough time. Now, how could you consider all those momentous decisions in 6 hours? It's just impossible. It's wrong. We'll appeal it. It's just... What else can I say? The family will be devastated by this, but we stick behind him because we know he's not guilty, as do all his friends. That's it.
When the judge found you guilty of second-degree kidnapping, you never showed any emotion.
Yeah.
For somebody who believes he is so innocent, why was there no emotion?
My attorney, John O'Connell in Salt Lake, and I've always mused over just how I should behave. What's the right way for Ted Bundy to behave and make sure that people get the right impression?
Piers, I ran up to him, I slapped my hand over his mouth to shut him up, and grabbed him and pulled him off that corner and hauled him back to my car and threw him in there because I was so appalled. And then I get in the car and I go, oh my God, I'm alone with this guy. And I drove him home afterwards. And I was absolutely terrified because sitting in my car was not my cousin. Sitting in my car was somebody completely different. And I turned and looked towards him, Piers, and he was just smiling at me, and I thought, oh my God, I hope I make it.
You know, what am I supposed to do? Am I going to jump up on the table? Am I going to scream? That's what I felt like doing. I heard my mother crying. It's an emotional time. I don't even like to think of that day. But I wasn't going to give these people who went out and built a case around a non-existent eyewitness, an eyewitness identification that was built by the police. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down.
I would never have thought that Ted would have ever done anything to harm me until those moments that I was sitting alone with him in the car. It was as if I looked through the wrong end of a telescope at this person across this huge expanse of my car. And I realized then what a risk it was to ride around alone with a serial killer who had just recently murdered somebody. In fact, I considered crashing my car. That I went through in my head all the scenarios of what I would do if he made a move. I was literally going to steer the car into a wall or whatever it was to wreck it. I wasn't going to let him, I wasn't going to go down easy.
People say Ted Bundy didn't show any emotion. There must be something in that. I showed emotion. You know what people said? See, he really can get violent and angry. There's no right way for me to act. I act, and I don't care what people think about how I act. I act according to the way I think is right and best for me at the time. And I'm not going to try to please people.
In October that year, he was discovered hiding in the bushes in the prison yard carrying road maps, airline schedules and a social security card, planning an escape. He was forced to spend several weeks in solitary confinement.
Do you ever feel like you'd like to escape?
Let me preface any answer to that remark by giving my feeling about jails. Somebody asked me, that question's been asked me before, I mean, would you want to escape, if you ever planned to escape? And if my attorney was here, he'd say, I object, Your Honor. Mr. Bundy is being asked a question, and an attempt is being made to ask Mr. Bundy to incriminate himself. But let me try to get my way out of that one. The Utah State Prison, as you know, is surrounded by several barbed wire fences and has many guards and towers, and they've got dogs that run around there, and they've got bars in the cells, and they've got count procedures. And what do you think that's all for? That's to keep the man in there.
Later that same month, due to the evidence found inside his car, Colorado police were now able to also charge him with the murder of Karen Campbell, and he was soon transferred to Aspen, Colorado in January of 1977. During this time, Elizabeth broke the news to Ted that it was her who reported him to the police, but she regretted it deeply, believing now that he was 100% innocent. Bundy, however, wasn't angry with her and asserted that he was not guilty and that the rest of the world would see that soon enough. On June the 7th, Ted had his preliminary hearing and decided to serve as his own attorney, which allowed him to be let out of handcuffs and/or leg shackles. During a break, he asked permission to visit the library to research more of his case. Once inside, Bundy hid behind a bookcase to escape the view of the guard before leaping out of a window on the second story, spraining his ankle on the landing but managing to escape. Ted had been practicing this for months beforehand in his cell, jumping from the top bunk of his bed to strengthen his leg muscles, to no avail. He discarded his outer clothing and then casually walked through Aspen undetected as roadblocks were being set up everywhere in an attempt to recapture him. He hiked towards Aspen Mountain before breaking into a hunting cabin where he stole some food, clothing and a rifle. The next day he headed towards Crested Butte but ended up becoming lost in the woods. He wandered aimlessly around the mountains for 2 days, missing 2 trails that led directly to where he was trying to go. On June the 10th, he broke into a trailer on Maroon Lake, 10 miles south of Aspen, stealing food and a ski parka. But instead of venturing further away, Bundy decided to head back towards Aspen, despite all of the roadblocks and ongoing search parties. 3 days later, he stole a car at the edge of the Aspen golf course, but was cold, wet from the rain, sleep deprived, and in agony from his sprained ankle. So he drove back into Aspen. 2 police officers noticed his erratic driving, pulled him over and recaptured him. Inside the car were maps of the entire mountainous area around Aspen, proving that he had planned this escape for a while. But once again, he was back in jail. Friends and attorneys all tried to convince him to just stay where he was. What little evidence there was against him was weak. The case was slowly diminishing and it was going in his favour. If he remained there and simply waited for the case to run its course, he could have gotten away with it. But Ted Bundy was already planning his next move.
You think about getting out of here?
Well, legally, sure.
I get a call from Ted Bundy, and I hadn't heard from him for a long time, which I thought was very unusual that he would call me. And on one hand, I was excited to hear him. On the other hand, I was just appalled to be talking to him. And so we talked about a few things, and then he said to me, well, what would you think if I tried to escape? I said, no, I don't think you should be doing that. In fact, no, do not attempt to do that. In fact, he had escaped once before, and I said to him, it didn't go well for you the first time, and I don't think it's going to go well for you the second time. You need to go through this trial. Do not escape. And we ended the conversation shortly after that because I didn't tell him things he wanted to hear at that point.
He managed to get his hands on a detailed floor plan of the jail, a hacksaw blade from some other inmates, and managed to smuggle in $500 over the course of 6 months. While other prisoners were showering every evening, making a lot of noise, Ted managed to saw a hole about 1 foot square between the steel reinforcing bars of his cell ceiling. He then intentionally lost about 35 pounds so he was able to wriggle through into the small crawl space above. For weeks he practiced this plan, exploring the space and ensuring that it would all come to pass perfectly. Many people did notice sounds and movement coming from the ceiling at night, and some even reported it, but no further investigation was ever done. By late 1977, Bundy's trial was still ongoing. He requested the case be transferred to Denver due to all of the publicity it was getting. This was denied, but the judge did agree that a change of venue was necessary, and on December the 23rd, they moved the case to Colorado Springs. However, on the night of December 30th, while most of the jail staff were still on Christmas break and many prisoners who weren't overly violent were allowed passes home to be with their families, Ted piled books and files onto his bed, covering them with a blanket to make it look like he was asleep, and climbed up into the crawl space. He then broke through the ceiling into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was out for the evening with his wife, changed into street clothes from the closet, and simply walked out the front door to complete freedom. Ted stole a car, but it ended up breaking down in the mountains. A passing motorist gave him a lift into Vail, Colorado, and from there he took a bus to Denver, where he then took a flight to Chicago, Illinois. Back in the jail, his escape wasn't discovered until December the 31st at noon. Over 17 hours later, Ted was already in Chicago by the time they realized that he was gone.
Of course, after he escaped, it was terrifying because we thought that he was going to come to me because he often dropped by. And so those moments were terrifying. I mean, we barricaded ourselves and we were living in a little trailer at the time.
Once there, he took a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he stayed until January the 2nd. 5 days later, he stole a car and drove to Atlanta, Georgia, before boarding a bus to Tallahassee, Florida on January the 8th. Bundy rented a room under the fake name of Chris Hagen near the Florida State University campus. He intended to gain a legitimate job and refrain from further criminal activities, believing that he could remain free and undetected in Florida forever as long as he didn't attract the attention of the police. However, this failed when he applied for a position at a construction site and refused to give proper identification. This led to Ted returning to his old ways of shoplifting and stealing customers' credit cards in supermarkets. In the early hours of January the 15th, 1978, a mere week after Bundy arrived in Tallahassee, Ted entered the Key Omega sorority house through a rear door which had a faulty lock.
Around 11:30, my roommate and I decided to go ahead and go to sleep for the night, and we did. During the night, around 3 in the morning, there was someone who was hiding in the bushes in the back parking lot of the sorority house. And this person had seen that the lock on the door was not completely working. Sorority sisters would go in the back door and the lock didn't lock. So this person had evil in his heart.
At around 2:45 a.m., he bludgeoned 21-year-old Margaret Bowman with a piece of oak firewood as she slept and proceeded to choke her with a nylon stocking.
She was a beautiful young woman. She was into merchandising and a senior, and she just had such poise and such eloquence to her. She was just a beautiful, beautiful girl, and I always felt comfortable talking with her. Again, just to talk about her day, and she'd ask me about mine. So she was a wonderful person.
He then entered the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Levy, beat her unconscious, strangled her, tore one of her nipples, bit deeply into her left buttock, and assaulted her with a bottle.
She was vibrant, she was an athletic, she was a wonderful girl and happy all the time. And we'd all sit in there and do our nails and our toenails and talk about the day.
Next, he attacked Kathy Kleiner, broke her jaw, and deeply lacerated her shoulder.
He was so quiet in killing us, in killing Margaret, in killing Lisa. I never heard a scream. I never heard anything. He attacked them so swiftly and killed them so quickly.
followed by Karen Chandler, who he gave a concussion, a broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger.
Bottom of the door swish against the carpet. I was a light sleeper, and I heard that noise, and it didn't wake me up. It just kind of, I knew a noise happened. I didn't know what it was. The next thing I remember was this big crashing sound. This person had tripped between that little locker we had between our beds. He tripped over it and made a loud sound. He then walked to my side of the twin bed. He lifted his arm up over his head, and he had that oak log in his hand, the same one he had just killed Lisa and Margaret with. When he attacked me, he made no noise. He said nothing. He did not utter a sound. At first it didn't hurt. It felt like hitting a sack of potatoes. I saw him and I was scared, and then I really began to hurt. And the blood was on my face, and it was terrible. I was crying. At this point, my roommate started to wake up because she heard the commotion. He walked over to her side of the bed, and he attacked her with that same log. He broke several bones in her body, in her face. He broke her arm. He then heard me moving again. Hearing me, he came back over to my side of the room. My face is just in torture. But I had made myself into the smallest little ball I could make in my bed because I thought if he couldn't see me, he wouldn't kill me.
Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler both survived, but they believe that it was only due to a car's headlight shining in and scaring him away.
It was just a black figure, a mass, standing next to me. And just as he raised his arm again over his head, holding that piece of firewood, the window lit up and a bright light shone into our bedroom. And from the parking lot into the room, it was just bright and beautiful light. And I could open my eyes in this little bitty ball, and I could see someone standing there now. And this person was kind of antsy, just kind of not knowing if I saw him or what the light was outside or what to do. So he turned around and left our room. He ran down the staircase and out the front door. Meanwhile, the room got dark again. And this light had been a car bringing home a sorority sister at 3 o'clock in the morning. After the room was dark, I was still in my little ball because I thought he was definitely going to come back and kill me.
It was believed that all 4 attacks took place within just 15 minutes, with around 30 witnesses being nearby who somehow heard none of it. After leaving the sorority house, Ted broke into a basement apartment 8 blocks away and attacked student Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She survived but was left with permanent deafness and equilibrium damage that ended her entire dancing career. On her bed, a semen stain was found, as well as a pantyhose mask with 2 hairs inside.
I had 5 skull fractures and multiple contusions in my head. And because of the skull fractures, the 8th nerve was damaged, and I lost the hearing in my left ear and the equilibrium. And I had a broken jaw, and my left shoulder was pulled out of joint, and I was just pretty bruised.
My parents had been flown up from Miami to Tallahassee, and they were in my room the whole time. And my girlfriend came up, and they were around me. I couldn't talk, and I hurt, and my face was bandaged, just like you see with 2 slits for your eyes because I had so much damage.
On February the 8th, Ted stole a van and drove to Jacksonville, Florida. There, he approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, the daughter of the police chief, but Ted soon fled the scene when Leslie's brother showed up and stood up to him.
Told me he was Richard Burton from the fire department. He had on a plastic tag. I knew that he wasn't. He fidgeted through his pockets. He had on an overcoat and a suit jacket.
I approached the man, and he had already got back in his vehicle and was starting to roll at the window, and I asked him what he wanted with my sister, and he said he was asking her if she was somebody else, and It just seemed real strange.
He then headed 60 miles towards Lake City. At the junior high school the next morning, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach was summoned to her homeroom by a teacher since she had forgotten her purse. But Kimberly never returned. It wasn't until 12 weeks later, after an extensive search, when her partially mummified remains were found in a pig farrowing shed near Suwannee River State Park, 35 miles northwest of Lake City. She had been killed. Her underwear were found near the body containing semen, and there was evidence to suggest that she was stripped, redressed, and then stripped again.
I mean, it's hard to find words for how devastating it is, the loss of this girl and the things that he did to her.
Little Kimberly Leach, 12 years of age. I think the public outcry is greater there because an innocent child was taken from a playground. What did you feel after that? Were there the normal emotions 3 days later? Where were you, Ted?
I can't really talk about that right now. That's
too painful.
I would like to. I'd like to be able to convey to you what that experience is like, but I can't. I won't be able to talk about that.
Okay.
I was very, very angry at him and deceived and betrayed. Just every emotion that you can possibly imagine, Piers. And heartbroken for his family. He had 4 other siblings and his mother, Louise. I mean, this was her son that had done this, and all the attention that they were getting. And of course, we were hiding out. And all the families that were devastated by what he did. And so many of the young women, they still don't know where they're buried.
Yeah.
And that just absolutely disturbs me to this day.
On February the 12th, Ted no longer had any money to pay his overdue rent and was concerned that the police were closing in on him, so he stole a car and left Tallahassee driving west. Just 3 days later at around 1 a.m, he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line for a simple warranty check, but it was discovered that the car he was driving was stolen. As soon as Lee was radioed the information, he attempted to place Ted under arrest, but Ted kicked Lee's legs out from under him and sprinted away. David Lee fired 2 shots before giving chase and tackling him to the ground. After further struggle, the officer managed to come out on top and was able to finally apprehend Ted Bundy.
You talked about getting out. Do you ever worry about what some of the parents of some of these women who think you are guilty, that they might come after you?
I don't worry about it. There are crazy people anywhere. I've been told that the parents of these girls are fairly decent people. I don't know, and I really feel for them because apparently they've suffered an incredible tragedy in their lives. The loss of a loved one is probably the most extreme kind of loss you can suffer in this life. And I feel as much for them as anybody can, not having gone through that myself. But as far as worrying about that, hey, if someone's crazy enough and nutty enough to do something like that, I can't stop them. There's nothing I can do.
Inside the stolen vehicle were 3 sets of IDs belonging to female students, 21 stolen credit cards, a stolen television set, dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses, and a pair of plaid slacks, which would later be identified as Ted's disguise as a firefighter. During the drive, David Lee had absolutely no idea that he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives in the entire country. But he did remember Ted whispering, "I wish you had killed me." During the Florida trials, Ted gave the fake identification of Kenneth Meisner. The issue was that this was a real person. Officials had to confirm that Ted was not him. Bundy refused to give his real identity, which also meant that he wasn't able to be released on bail either. He wasn't known in Florida, so there was absolutely no way to link him to the disappearances and attacks in Washington, Colorado, or Utah. He was kept in custody with no name as the court tried to figure out what to do with him. Eventually, it was discovered that his vehicle was stolen near the Chi Omega sorority house. Furthermore, Ted finally revealed his real name, but only in exchange for a phone call to Elizabeth Klepfer. Ironically, around the same time, Klepfer heard of the attacks and had a gut feeling that Ted was there and informed the Florida police. After Bundy had escaped, the authorities were convinced that he would try to make contact with Elizabeth, and they decided to tap her phone to record any conversations. But he actually called her before this could be done. On February the 16th, 1978, Ted Bundy called Elizabeth, and this was the closest he ever came to finally confessing. As written by Elizabeth, quote, "You shouldn't be calling me," I told him. "There's a tap on the phone." I lied. He was crying. It's okay. I'm in custody. It's all over." "Where?" I asked. "Well, I made a deal with the police. They aren't going to announce my arrest until tomorrow morning so that I can talk with you and my family. It's going to be bad when it breaks." "I'm not going to call up Channel 7, I told him. "Where are you?" "Florida." "Pensacola." "Oh no, I was hoping you'd be picked up anywhere but Florida. I saw this picture in the paper last month. Those sorority women were murdered. I told the FBI that I hoped you weren't there." "It's gonna be bad," he said. "Real bad when it breaks tomorrow. I want you to be prepared. It could be really ugly." "Are you a suspect in those murders?" I asked. "I wish we could sit down, alone, and talk about things, with nobody listening, about why I am the way I am." There was a long pause. I didn't want to know, but I asked anyway. "Are you telling me that you're sick?" "Back off," he barked. "I meant, how come I've hurt you so many times?" I was startled by the abruptness of his answer. I said nothing. Ted and I continued to talk. I told him I was surprised that he was back in custody, that I thought he would rather be dead than be a prisoner again. "I thought so too," he told me. "I'm really disappointed in myself. I just didn't have what it takes to die." I wanted to talk more about the circumstances of his arrest, particularly about the murders I'd read about. He told me not to bring it up again, that he didn't want to talk about it. End quote. 2 days later, on February the 18th at 2 a.m, Ted called Elizabeth once again. Quote, "I want to talk about what we were talking about on Thursday," he said haltingly. "About being sick?" I asked. "Yes, I've been talking with a priest." He was crying. "I'm going to try to clear things up in a way that I'll be back in Washington. I have a responsibility to those who have suffered and I want to reconcile things," he went on in a weak voice. "I was afraid you would have nothing to do with me if I told you." His voice was so weary that I started to cry. "Didn't you always think it was possible?" "No," I said. "I didn't think it could be true. I had my doubts, but I just couldn't accept it. Sometimes I wondered if it was me, that you hated me and wanted to kill me. No, there is something the matter with me. It wasn't you. It was me. I just couldn't contain it. I fought it for a long time. It got too strong. We just happened to be going together when it got underway. I tried. Believe me, I tried to suppress it. It was taking more and more of my time. That's why I didn't do well in school. My time was being used trying to make my life look normal, but it wasn't normal. All the time I could feel that force building in me. Did you ever... How was I going to put this? Did you ever want to kill me?" There was a long, heavy silence. "But there was one time when I was really trying hard to control it, so I'd been staying off the streets and trying to feel normal. But it just happened that I was sleeping with you at your house when I felt it coming on. I closed the damper so the smoke couldn't go up the chimney, and then I left to put a towel in the crack under the door so the smoke would stay in the apartment. I remember that night well. I'd been pretty drunk by the time we climbed into the hider bed in front of the fireplace. I woke up briefly as Ted was leaving, and he told me he was going back to his house to get his fan because the fireplace was backed up. I'd sleepily pulled the covers over my head because I couldn't breathe. But soon I couldn't breathe under the covers either. My eyes were running and I was coughing. I jumped out of bed and threw open the nearest window and stuck my head out. After I'd recovered some, I opened all the windows and doors and broke up the fire the best I could. I'd gotten on Ted the next day for not coming back with the fan. As he told me now that he had wanted me to die that night, I almost didn't believe him. It didn't fit with the murders. I thought that maybe he wasn't willing to talk about any more serious attempts to kill me." End quote. However, once Elizabeth had gathered up enough courage to inform the police of this confession, Ted completely denied it and claimed that she had twisted everything he said. He accused her of betraying his trust by exposing a private conversation and by twisting things out of context to what she thought she heard, continuing to insist on his complete innocence.
I had met up during that time with a Seattle Times reporter, Richard Larson, who had become a friend of Ted's down while Ted was working for the re-election campaign of a really popular Governor Dan Evans. And so I reached out to Richard Larson because I figured he'd be one of the only ones that would know what I was going through because he was deceived by Ted too. So I visited him frequently, and he worked for the Seattle Times, and he made a proposition to me that maybe I could go to Florida to see Ted, that maybe I could get him to reveal at that time were some of these, to some of these murders. And I really considered it, but at the time when I went back home and started talking to Dawn about it, we realized that he would never convince me or reveal that to me. And also looking at his letters, it was obvious that he was never going to admit that he murdered these women and tell me where the bodies were.
You are not guilty.
I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old? I'm not guilty of the charges which have been filed against me.
And the allegations?
And the allegations.
And the rumors and the
I don't know all of what you're speaking about, Lucky. It's too broad and I can't get into it in any detail. But I'm satisfied with my blanket statement that I'm innocent. No man is truly innocent. I mean, we all have transgressed in some way in our lives. And as I say, I've been impolite, and there are things I regret having done in my life. But nothing like the things I think that you're referring to.
Have you ever physically harmed anyone?
Ever physically harmed anyone? No. No. You know, again, not in the context I think that you're speaking of.
What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. You always say an indictment, all right? Why don't you read it to me? You're up for election, aren't you? Mr. Bundy got it, didn't you? Mr. Bundy, you told me that you were going to get me. You said he was going to get me. Okay, you've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary, 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. Design or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy.
My chance to talk to the press.
Contrary to section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jury...
In addition to the stolen car evidence, some eyewitnesses identified Ted, claiming that they saw him leaving the sorority house around the time of the attack, although some weren't 100% sure, as they didn't get a decent enough look. The witness accounts weren't particularly strong for the case, but it was enough to keep him in custody for questioning. Bundy was soon relocated to Miami, Florida before standing trial for the Key Omega murders in June of 1979. This was the first ever trial to be televised nationally in the United States.
I'm not going to be in this room in the jury box, and I'm not going through this, and you knew that, Your Honor. Sit down. You know how far you can push me. You want to make a circus? You've got a circus, and you'll have a whole ring on your parade, Jack. You'll see a thunderstorm. This will not be the patent little drama you arrange. Bundy, sit down. It's not to be a party to me. Please find water. You understand? Look at the people they struck. Look at the people they struck. Room in the jury box, and I'm not going through this, and you knew that, Your Honor. Sit down. You know how far you can push me. Sit down, Mr. Bundy. Keep the jury out, please. Young. Wait a minute. Sit down, Mr. Bundy. Good, Mr. Bundy. Understand? Wait a minute. Just let go. We're going to go to the holdings. With the court being recessed.
Since I have been in Dade County, I've been allowed to...
Don't shake your finger at me, young man. Don't shake your finger at me, young man.
The court offered 5 different attorneys, but Ted refused and again decided to defend himself. It was concluded that he did a terrible job from the very beginning because he was facing a possible death sentence and was far more concerned with being in charge and the centre of attention than defending his case. He would often question the police officers at the scene of the crime, asking them to repeatedly describe what they found, almost as if he was proud of the massacre that he had left behind.
We went into the courthouse, into a conference room, and the police stood outside the door with my parents. They opened the door and walked me into the conference room, which was a pretty large room, and it had a long conference table. So I went and sat down at the head of the table. I looked up, and there was Ted Bundy sitting on the other end of the table. And I looked at him, and he was very, come on, let's get over this, just like bored. His eyes to me were black. I don't know what color they're supposed to be, but it was just devoid of personality, of anything. He was just that black mass that was behind me. And that's what I saw in his eyes, just evil and just nasty things.
I was hit at the head, and I had cuts on my head. I had a broken jaw. Some of my teeth were knocked out. I had broken facial bones. I had a broken arm and a crushed finger.
But I do remember the defense asking me, is this the man you accused of attacking you in your bed at the sorority house that night? And I had to look at them and I had to say, I don't know, because I never saw his face.
My jaw was broken in 3 places. I had lacerations on my shoulder and like whiplash on my neck.
Why did you decide to defend yourself?
I began thinking about that way back in Utah. I had a year to study criminal law in action, and I have a lot of I'm a very biased person, and I have a lot of strong opinions about how things should be done.
However, Ted was offered a deal. If he simply pled guilty to the killing of Levy and Bowman, he would be spared the death penalty and would instead be given a 75-year prison sentence. Ted was still adamant that he was innocent, so he saw this as a win-win. He could plead guilty but then wait for a few years for the evidence to disintegrate and for witnesses to retract their testimonies. But he decided to change his mind and instead use this as his defense. Bundy blamed the court's incompetence for offering him this deal, claiming that they had given up on him, believing that an innocent man was guilty, and he refused to go along with it.
I have the greatest amount of confidence that, at least in the preparation stage, that my ideas will work. And believe me, I'm not standing here alone. I'm just called to half a dozen attorney friends of mine today. Every day I get input, every day I ask questions.
He believed that this was a tactical move to prove his innocence, while others believed it was incredibly foolish and narcissistic. Bundy just couldn't bear to stand up in front of everyone and admit that he was actually guilty of something.
The reason I went on my own is because I just felt it was time. I felt it was right. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to become a part of my defense because I am such a part of it. I mean, I obviously I'm going to bear the consequences, so why not bear the responsibility of seeking my own acquittal and sustaining my own innocence.
I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for and receive the pain for that act, but I will not share the burden for the guilt.
They had also previously surprised Ted by taking a mould of his teeth, and they perfectly matched the bite wounds on Lisa Levy's body, although it should be noted that bite mark evidence has been largely discounted in recent years. The jury deliberated for around 7 hours before finding Ted Bundy guilty of murder and 2 counts of burglary on July the 24th, 1979.
Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
It's a 3-ring circus, it's not a 10-ring circus. And we didn't feel the agony we would go through by going down there would compensate for a few minutes of talking to Ted through glass. And he also felt that way too.
6 months passed before he faced a second trial in Orlando for the murder of Kimberly Leach. After 8 hours deliberation, he was again found guilty thanks to a witness seeing him leading Leach from the schoolyard to his stolen van, as well as evidence of clothing fibres being found in the vehicle and on Kimberly's body, which matched the jacket he was wearing the day he was arrested. As his sentence drew closer, Ted Bundy attempted another tactical move. In the state of Florida, a marriage proposal in court in the presence of a judge is considered a completely legitimate marriage. As he was questioning former colleague Carol Ann Boone, who had since moved to Florida to be near him and had constantly defended his innocence, he proposed to her and she accepted. They were now legally married.
Carol, do you want to marry me? I want to marry you.
Ted hoped that since this was technically his wedding day, the court would go easy on him and not punish him on such a special occasion. On February the 10th, 1980, Ted Bundy was sentenced to death by electrocution. As this was announced, Bundy stood up and shouted, "Tell the jury they were wrong." He still maintained his complete innocence. In October of 1981, Carol Ann Boone gave birth to a little girl called Rose, and Ted was somehow the father. It's believed that Bundy had bribed a guard with money to allow some alone time with her during one of the visits.
He had, I believe, one daughter called Rose. Do you have any contact with her?
I do not. I'm sure she's trying to stay out of the, she doesn't want to be a public figure either, and I don't blame her at all. So no connection at all with her.
As the trial ended and the sentence was announced, Ted went through a series of interviews with Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth. He insisted on his innocence for the longest time, so they suggested he explain what he thought happened to the victims so that he could discuss it in the third person, therefore avoiding the stigma of a confession. After over 100 hours of taped interviews, Ted Bundy never confessed.
No empathy whatsoever, and didn't feel bad for what he did at all. In fact, he wanted to, let the past be the past. Bygones be bygones. Let's look forward to the future. And my contention in all those letters that I wrote is that, if I had cut off my arm, it would still be missing today. So you can't discount the past 100%. It still is going to affect you, and you have to be responsible for what you did.
He did, however, begin to admit to his burglary crimes, confirming Elizabeth's story. He admitted that he enjoyed seeing anything he wanted and having the power to simply take it. In July of 1984, prison guards discovered 2 hacksaw blades hidden in Ted Bundy's cell. One of the cell windows had a steel bar completely sawed through and then glued back into place with some soap-based adhesive. They also discovered an unauthorized mirror, and he was soon relocated to a different cell. Not long after, he had an altercation with another criminal, John Hinckley Jr., the man who attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. In October 1984, Bundy contacted Officer Robert Keppel to share his apparent expertise in the psychology of a serial killer. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, was still on the loose and unidentified, and they needed help. Being a student of psychology, Ted seemed to think that he knew all about them, and that he could be of some use, though Ridgway remained at large for nearly 2 more decades. In early 1986, March the 4th was set for Bundy's execution, but was later rescheduled for unknown reasons. By April, July the 2nd was the new date, but just 15 hours before Ted was due to die, the court suspended the case for further review, not believing that Ted's mental state was competent enough to stand trial back in 1979. It was later scheduled for November the 18th, 1986, but just 1 day prior, it was again postponed. In the middle of 1988, a re-evaluation of the case was denied, and finally, January the 24th, 1989 was confirmed as his date of execution. The police have claimed that this was moved as quickly as possible, and nobody used any delaying tactics. This was one of the faster cases as far as they were concerned, but it took a whole 9 years for Ted Bundy to finally be taken to execution.
He was sitting on death row, just feet away from the execution chamber. And I was telling him, this is my chance to tell him, hey, Ted, this is your opportunity to do something right. I mean, it's not going to absolve you of your sins, absolutely not. But it's your opportunity at least to do something for these families, especially the girls and the young women, their family who don't know where you left their remains. And he just completely ghosted me, shined me on, put me down, patronized me. And as you so aptly read, just what's done is done. And then he quoted me scriptures of all things, which I thought was pretty insulting.
With all appeals now denied, Ted finally had no reason to lie, and after almost a decade and a half of denying it, he finally confessed to murder.
You are guilty of killing many women and girls.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
He went into detail with the sick things that he did to the victims afterwards, including necrophilia. It's believed that he only confessed to these crimes now in an attempt to again avoid the electric chair.
You are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock if you don't receive another stay. What is going through your mind? What thoughts have you had in these last few days?
Well, I won't kid you to say that it's something that I feel that I am in control of, or something that I've come to terms with, because I haven't. It's a moment-by-moment thing. Sometimes I feel very tranquil, and other times I don't feel tranquil at all. what's going through my mind right now is to use the minutes and hours that I have left as fruitfully as possible and see what happens. It helps to live in the moment, in the essence that we use it productively. So right now I'm feeling calm, and in large part because I'm here with you.
That's what bugs me. There are those who commit horrible crimes and they can own up to it. And he did not own up to it, not until, of course, when he was trying to save his own skin. And to me, that's bullshit. You know, no, fuck you, that doesn't count, man. Suddenly you're gonna start admitting to it and saying that you were wrong because you're trying to save your skin. No, too late. Too little, too late. It's a tricky maneuver within yourself to go from loving and respecting somebody to deciding without argument with yourself that you now think complete opposite of that person. The most extreme opposite.
We were angry for a while yesterday, even this morning, that he never confided in us. Of course, if he had, what would we have done then? Mm-hmm. You don't usually go around telling your mom that you've been doing these kinds of things. That I understand, but for 13 years, he's sworn up and down, backwards and forwards, that he was innocent. And then all of a sudden, we believed him, we wanted to believe him. He's still our son, no matter what he's done, and we love him very much.
I still am appalled at what he did and don't understand it. I don't think anybody can understand what he did. You have to speculate what happened to him in his life that caused him to do something like this. And I still care deeply about the Ted Bundy that I knew, but I horrifically despise the Ted Bundy that he became and what he did to people.
He admitted to driving for hours back to a victim's body and spending the night with them, and confessed to decapitating about 12 of the victims with a hacksaw and keeping at least one of their heads. But he always gave conflicting numbers for his total death count. In one conversation he said 36, but on the evening before his execution, 30, though 7 of those victims remain unidentified today. He confessed to the death of Donna Manson on Taylor Mountain, which was never known, and he even incinerated her head in Elizabeth Klepfer's fireplace. He claimed he had murdered people in California, but the victim remains a mystery. However, back when he was speaking in the third person, he implied that he had killed over 100 people. He confessed to murders that the police weren't even aware of, though some believe, as a compulsive liar, that Ted stretched the truth and he wasn't responsible for some of the missing person cases. He simply wanted to exaggerate his body count to increase his infamy, though Robert Keppel himself is convinced that Ted did murder more than the 30 confirmed.
And I can only hope that those who I have harmed, those who I've caused so much grief, even if they don't believe my expression of sorrow and remorse, will believe what I'm saying now, that there is loose in their towns and their communities people like me today whose dangerous impulses are being fueled day in and day out by violence in the media in its various forms, particularly sexualized violence. And what scares me, and let's come into the present now, because what I'm talking about happened 20, 30 years ago, that is, in my formative stages. And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson, is when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today, with stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence. There are kids sitting out there switching the TV dial around and come upon these movies late at night, or I don't know when they're on, but they're on and any kid can watch them. It's scary when I think what would have happened to me if I had seen. That was scary enough.
During these final confessions, when asked why, he said that he began killing to avoid being caught, but it soon became an addiction, fueled by his viewing of violent pornography. Ted claimed that murder became a part of him, but he considered himself an amateur in his early years, and that he wasn't a pro until the death of Linda Healy in 1974, implying that he had murdered well before then, which he often denied. Many still believe that his first murder was that of Anne-Marie Burr in August 1961, 13 years before Linda Healy's death, when Ted was just 14 years old, though he always denied this claim. He said that he would never hurt a little girl, despite his final known murder being a 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, a killing that he consistently refused to talk about. Interestingly, Bundy went on record by saying that a serial killer's first murder is something that should never be discussed. He described his brutal attacks in great detail, showing no remorse, and he seemed to almost take pride in them all. He also seemed to leave out specific details in hopes to delay his execution further, but to no avail. For some murders, he claimed the remains were left in a certain area, but once searched, none were found. Some of the victims' families even petitioned to try to postpone his execution to gain more details, but these were denied. Carol Ann Boone had always believed his innocence and now felt deeply betrayed to learn otherwise. She moved back to Washington with their daughter and divorced him. He tried to call her on the morning of his execution for one last talk, but she refused to pick up the phone. She had also learned that he had cheated on her as well as Elizabeth Klepfer. Carol and her daughter have since changed their names and haven't been heard from since. It's unclear whether Ted's daughter Rose is even aware of who she truly is. Much like Boone, Klepfer also seemed to move away and has remained quiet until the recent releases of newer documentaries and feature films, while his first love, Diane Edwards, has also remained out of the public eye. On the day before his execution, Ted Bundy did consider suicide, stating that he didn't want to give the state the satisfaction of watching him die. In his final interview, hours before death, Bundy finally appeared to show remorse and emotion, though not responsibility for his actions. Many believe that this is all a ruse in an attempt to again delay or even prevent his execution. He even tried 10 minutes before his death to confess to even more murders to no avail. Officers did attempt to try to use his willingness to talk to confess to more unsolved murders and missing person cases. Ted Bundy died in the electric chair at 7:16 a.m. on January the 24th, 1989, at the age of 42. For his final words, Bundy expressed sympathy and apologized for his actions.
All he said is, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." That was Ted Bundy's last statement.
His eyes looked like he was almost a child, and his mother called him doing something wrong. It was a combination of just being sorry and knowing that it was the end. It was the end of the line.
Hundreds of members of the public, as well as 20 off-duty police officers, stood outside, sang, danced, and celebrated as his death was confirmed.
My husband and I were living in South Florida, and when we got this news, we turned on television and saw the people on each side of the street pro and death penalty. And it was interesting to watch, seeing all these people, how they could offer up a do not kill thought to what he did, and he should be killed. So we watched, and it was time now for the execution to get underway, but he was in the penitentiary, and he was actually, before that, crying and saying, "Please don't kill me, I'll tell you more victims." And I can imagine those were the words, the last words that the women said to him, "Please don't kill me, please don't." And he did.
His body was cremated and his ashes scattered at an undisclosed location in the Cascade Range in accordance with his will, not far from where he had discarded so many of his victims so many years prior. Ted's mother Louise was heartbroken to learn that he had confessed, and always questioned what caused her son to perform these horrible actions, as he was raised right and never seemed to be a troubled child. However, despite his confession, she still maintained that he was completely innocent, claiming that her son just wasn't capable of doing these things. Throughout her entire life, even up to and after his execution, she maintained that her son was not a murderer, all the way up until her death in 2012, believing that he only confessed as a way to try to save his own life. Some believe that she just had no empathy or ability to understand the situation, and this may have genetically been passed on to Ted as well.
People are fascinated with true crime. They can't get enough of it. I never have been. Probably because of this. I never watched any of those things about Ted Bundy until I started researching for this book. I didn't read anything about him. I was appalled by the attention that he got. But it's a fact of life. He epitomizes a certain character in history, and let's face it, I'm a student of history. I majored in history at the University of Washington, and this, unfortunately, I'm tied to this particular historical figure, and I think that, people just can't get enough of it. I don't know why, but they do.
And my husband and I were downstairs on the sofa, and I started to cry. And I cried, and I cried, and I wailed. And I was thinking of all the beautiful women that he had taken away from us so soon. All the women he had killed were someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's sister.
The cause of Ted's murderous lifestyle has forever baffled the world. He underwent psychiatric examinations while he was alive and was initially diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but this was later ruled out. It was believed that he had multiple personality disorder. Ted himself denied this, however, claiming that he never blacked out, didn't hear voices, and always fully remembered what it was that he was doing. Many witnesses claimed that Bundy would change into a completely different person at will, including his great aunt, who claimed that she waited with him at a dark train station once, and he turned into what seems like a complete stranger. She was terrified of him. However, it seemed like he leaned more towards antisocial personality disorder, as he had outward charm and charisma with very little true personality or genuine insight. He had the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, but it had minimal effect on his behaviour, and he would feel no guilt or remorse. Another theory is that he had narcissistic personality disorder. He confessed to 30 murders, but he never took full responsibility for any of them. He blamed his actions on his abusive grandfather, the absence of his biological father, the concealment of his true parentage, alcohol, the media, the police, who he believed planted evidence on him, society in general, violence on television, true crime periodicals, and even pornography. He blamed television for brainwashing him into stealing, and even blamed the victims, claiming that the facial expression showed that they were already afraid of him, and stated that they invited the abuse and they expected to be hurt.
Another factor here that I haven't mentioned is the use of alcohol. But I think that what alcohol did, in conjunction with, let's say, my exposure to pornography, was alcohol reduced my inhibitions. At the same time, the fantasy life that was fueled by pornography eroded them further.
Being a survivor of Ted Bundy has been hard. It was mentally and physically draining. Emotionally, pretty much afraid of men. So at one point, I was afraid to go outside early in the beginning. So I would walk outside, I would feel the sun on my face, and I would look at the trees, and I would see each individual leaf. And each leaf was a product of the tree. And all the other leaves were there because the tree was strong. And I would take myself out there when I felt bad for myself or sorry. And that helped me come out of my shell. That helped me realize that I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get through this.
Ted Bundy is one of the most infamous and notorious serial killers in American history, and he still raises discussion to this day. He confessed to 30 murders, but in all likelihood, he was responsible for a lot more. But what sent this young up-and-coming politician, this intelligent law student, into such a spiralling decline of madness? We may never know when his murderous rampage began, but even though his execution was over 30 years ago, we all still remain seeking answers. Their relationship would often be tested.